Welcome back to the Anchored Podcast, the official podcast of the Classic Learning Test. My name is Soren Schwab, VP of Partnerships here at CLT, and today we're joined by Rachelle Kearns. Rachelle was born and raised in Toronto, Canada, but now resides in Seattle. She received her Bachelor of Arts at the University of Toronto with a focus in fine arts and art history, as well as her diploma in art from Sheridan College. Kearns is an accomplished artist, exhibiting in Canada, the United States, and Switzerland. Commissioned by companies such as Tiffany & Co., Disney, and P&O Cruises, her work resides in numerous private and public art collections worldwide, and we are so honored to have Rachelle on the podcast. Welcome to Anchored, Rachelle.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Oh, this is going to be so delightful. I don't think we've had poets and we've had authors on the podcast. I think you are the first artist on the podcast. So I'm really excited to pick your brain a little bit there. But before we do, we start the Anchored podcast always about talking about our guest's own educational journey. So you grew up in Canada. What kind of schools did you attend? What kind of education did you receive?
Yeah, I received a very normal, kind of like a very normal education growing up. I grew up in the public school system. My parents had bought a home that basically allowed us to walk to elementary school and then literally walk to high school as well. So it was a great location for the home, but that was just the standard that I grew up with. So I was like very normal, very subpar.
Yeah.
From I feel like what our kids are getting now. Yeah, it was just a very normal education. But then I chose very intentionally to go into the arts at University of Toronto. And as much as I loved my education through the University of Toronto and the fine arts and art history that came with that, I just to be very honest, I kind of came out very disillusioned as an artist. I didn't know my place as a Christian artist in particular. I didn't really subscribe to the whole starving artist kind of thing. And then I didn't really have any major political agenda. And so I just felt like, okay, I guess I just don't have a fit here. And so I ended up actually in sales for 5 years, as most fine art graduates do. And
Got to pay the
then
bills.
through a crazy set of circumstances, I was able to, come back and be able to start being a professional artist in 2004. And I've stuck with it. And the Lord really did a work in my heart and really helped me to see, what I can do and what I can say as an artist, as a Christian artist in this world.
Wow, I'm so glad that you made that decision. I've spoken with some folks that wanted to pursue, graduate school or PhD in the humanities, and they kind of felt the same way. It's like, well, unless I do everything through the lens of something with which I really at the core disagree, I don't fit in. I don't have a spot. But then again, we often think of artists of going, counterculture, right, and are going swimming against the current. So I guess you took that route.
I did. And I really think like I have to kind of pay tribute to Makoto Fujimura, if you've heard of him. He doesn't know it. I don't know him personally, but he's been a huge mentor in my artist walk and artist journey. But he in his book, Art and Faith, really kind of helped give language to this to me. He talked about how the imagination, like art, has often been seen as, suspect by some Christians, largely driven by a fear that art will lead us away from the truth and into more of like an anarchic, freedom of expression kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think that may be true for some. I'm not going to discount that thinking, but it's definitely not for me. And for, I think, so many of us who are attracted and drawn to beauty, to beautiful things. And when I immerse myself in nature, I can't help but feel close to God. And so it was through my understanding of God as creator that things really started to shift for me. And I think it's important for us to really stop and think about it, right? Like when we say that God is creator, we have to also understand that it means that he is creative. And I think it's just so easy for us to miss this. Like we can't forget to remember that he's the one that first created colors.
Yeah.
All the colors, like the grass, the sky, the stars, like he creatively thought of it all. Like when I paint, I always have some sort of reference point, a frame of reference, whether it be water, chandeliers, light. But like God had no reference point. Like when he created these things like on his own, from his own imagination, out of absolutely nothing. And I just think that that's crazy. And I truly believe that he designed all these things to bring us joy, like
Yeah.
sunrises and sunsets and the waves and the ocean and the mountains for our enjoyment, our pleasure, our inspiration, and to draw us to himself. And, Makoto, as I referred to here, I'm going to paraphrase what he's saying here, but he talks about the fact that God moves in our hearts to be experienced and then makes all of us to be artists of the kingdom. And that act of making can lead us to know the creator personally, even though that experience is not a guarantee of that knowledge.
Mhm.
And I think it's also really important for us to remember that the word of God is active and alive, and that God the artist communicates to us first before God the lecturer. you know?
Mhm.
And I think that my heart really resonates with this so deeply with this. I find that first off, as an artist, it's my purpose and hope for what I do to be able to reflect back to him how beautiful I think his creativity is. He's my audience of one, right? Like,
Yeah.
but then it's also my hope for anyone who encounters my work that I want the viewer to be drawn to the light, be mesmerized by it, because maybe one day it will lead them to the truth with a capital T, right? Or
Mhm.
beauty with a capital B, or light with a capital L, right? Like they'll be drawn to himself, and that's what I hope for and what I do.
Well, and perfect transition point, because I was going to ask you, in this liberal arts or classical renewal movement that we're seeing here in the United States, a lot of the focus is on truth, goodness, and beauty, right? And in that,
Yeah.
a capital T, a capital G, a capital B. Uh, how do you, when you think about your art, does it influence when you paint, when you think about your art, and if so, how?
Yeah, I definitely resonate with truth, beauty, and goodness. And I think for sure, if I had to put one as most important or the one that always gets me first, it would be beauty. Beauty happens to always be the catalyst for sure. But I would also say that my art has, truth and goodness too. Like I was just describing before, how I want, people to be drawn
Hmm.
to that truth. Um, I think yeah, like my work, when I talk about it being light inspired, that really is a subtle way of saying it's inspired by God. And
Hmm.
so I endeavor to be able to paint his beauty, like I was saying, like I reflect it in all that I paint and all that I do. Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, it's so. I think sometimes we talk about disparagingly about modern art, right, and
Yeah.
contemporary artists, but it is interesting because so much in my limited knowledge seems to be about just shocking, right, and just about creating this kind of effect where for the longest time, I mean millennia, right, it was to glorify, right, it was to represent objective, right, values in nature in the art. um and so you're departing kind of from that, but in a way you're just going back to what maybe art used to be.
Yeah, potentially. I also think that I think it's like a forever kind of truth that his creation is meant to stir awe and wonder in
Mm.
us. And I think if and when we pause long enough to think about it and to actually observe it, you can so easily get there.
Yeah.
Like, and I think that's the thing. Like it's there around us every day, all the time. But it's whether or not we want to pay attention to it. And so it was when I started to pay attention to light. It was random, but I had been doing a personal devotional study about mercy in my own, walk. Like when I graduated from university, I still hadn't found my artistic voice. I had been dabbling in a ton of things, and you can definitely, like, if you look back, you see streams of how I got to where I got to, but I still hadn't discovered, my voice or the circle kind of like as my thing yet. And that came way later for me. That was when I happened to be studying the word mercy, and I was asking God the question, what does it look like? And
Hmm.
not really knowing that I was asking for an artistic voice, if that makes any sense. I didn't
Yeah.
put the two and two together at all. It was just my own personal curiosity that I was like kind of following up on. And so fast forward, it was 2006, and I'm on a dock overlooking the water, a typical very beautiful scene, right? Like when you think about it. And that it was a cloudy day, but then the clouds parted and the light started to dance on the water. And my first thought was, this is it. Mercy is like light. It's all around us. It covers us. Without it, life would be very dark. And I felt that that was like an inspired moment of truth. And so from that point on, my entire life as a professional artist changed. I became slightly obsessed with
Yeah.
watching, like observing water, observing light on water, watching for its patterns, its the colors, how seasons change the colors, how time of day affects things, how there's shadows in play with hues, and all of that became like slightly obsessed with, and then endeavored to begin to paint it. um, and it was interesting because at that time I had not had any success as an artist at all. But I took those very first, three paintings called my Mercyscape paintings, and I'll never forget it. Like that, it was such a different. I'd been to so many. At this point, I had been going for basically 2 years full time and had not gotten anywhere with the work. And but yet at that show, people resonated with it, and it's amazing to me to watch that and witness that, because I think that beauty, as I was saying before, like it's still shocking. It's
Yeah.
still magnificent. It's like, and I think it's sometimes more magnificent than some of the other kinds of shocking, or that kind of delve into more the dark and evil and mysterious kind, kind.
Yeah.
I think beauty can be just as, if not more, shocking and glorious in a way that people resonate with, because everybody wants to be in touch with and experience beautiful things.
It
So
reminds me a little bit of Narnia, Aslan.
yeah,
Is he safe? No, but he's good, right? And if it's something
yes,
that's awe-inspiring, I mean,
yes,
it is you feel small and there's the sublime, but that can still be shocking, and can
right.
really awaken you to a larger truth. Um, Talk to me a little bit about, and we have a lot of teachers, homeschool parents that are listening to the podcast. um, I I think it's safe to assume that you are a proponent of the teaching of art in K-12, but the reality is that a lot of progressive education, right, has kind of removed the humanities, removed the arts, because they're not as quote unquote practical, right? It's all about workforce preparation. So, what would be kind of your case for teaching art in kind of a K-12 setting, and why?
Yeah, so I'm not gonna propose that I know what the right way to do it is.
True.
But I do think I like absolutely will say it's extremely important to be able to teach kids the importance of art in all of its forms and mediums, because I honestly believe it's the closest, most tangible thing for kids to understand the breadth and length and depth and height of God's love. Like, to see God as creator, to see the Bible as an art form, and that the journey to know God, and again, I'm going to quote Makoto Fujimura here, that, requires not just ideas and information, but the act of actually translating our ideas into physical movements and real objects. To me, that is like, it's absolutely tantamount to having a full picture of who God is. And so yes, I think that art is extremely important. And I think from a very early age too, like before even the, kindergarten stage, I think that adopting a kind of a, like, a way in your home of helping your kids see beauty all around them, whether it be through, sitting on a bed of grass and watching the clouds go by and noting the shapes in them, or listening to a piece of music over and over again, and then maybe, picking out specific instruments and how that makes you feel, and shadow play, and like there's so, like, baking bread together, like I just making meals together. There's so much art that I think that exists in our homes, that, we have the privilege of being able to help our kids enjoy, and take pleasure in the wonder and the awe of, of all that God has created. And so I think that that is really first and foremost important, to be able to pass on to our kids, and they will get that. Most of our teaching as parents, right, is more caught than taught. And I've said this often. So they will pick up, like, our, sensibilities and our
Mhm.
disciplines and our habits in a way that, it just gets transferred to them. So I think how we live, and I also think it's super countercultural to be slowing down, to be doing less, and to be savoring the moments instead of, more and more and more, which is what I think this world often touts as being a really good thing. But I definitely am here to say that I don't think it's the best thing for our kids, and I don't think it's raising our kids to be critical thinkers that are thoughtful and articulate and able to, understand why they feel and think the way that they do.
Rachelle, you got my head spinning. I'm thinking about a million different things, but I think you're so absolutely right, and there is, especially in classical education, and you said your children go to a classical school. The idea of skole, like this more restful learning, that it's not all about just more and more and more and more and more, but really about the quality, not just the quantity. One of my favorite poets is William Carlos Williams, and his poetry and art, it focuses a lot about the everyday beauty, right, that we
Mm-hmm.
have. And the red wheelbarrow, of course, is this most famous one, but just
Mm-hmm.
appreciating that. So I guess when I'm listening to you, the way you talk about art, or even the instruction of art, is more about preparing the heart to receive it, right? Like to be open to seeing
Yeah.
it all around you. And I guess when you told your story, how you personally, it was kind of, you finally saw that light, so to speak, and had that
Yeah.
inspiration. But would you say you have to be in a certain space or a certain environment to be receptive to that?
Yes, I do think environment is really important. And actually, even for me, I would say personally, I didn't learn this fully, I felt, until I had kids. And so,
Hmm.
like, one of the evolutions in my work was, so the Mercyscape series is kind of what put me on the map as an artist. It definitely resonated, and I was able to be in a bunch of, shows, and started to be exhibited in galleries and things like that. And then I got married and had two kids in short order. They're only 12 months apart. And so I had to make some really big decisions. I pulled out of a bunch of galleries, and, knew that this was my, number one priority was, being wife and mother. And so that meant that I had to make some very practical decisions about how I was going to spend my time. And I will say, like, those early years as a mom, I struggled. Like, that was not a simple thing for me at all. It was painful and it was hard. And I remember it was when Levi, who's my second born, when he was about a year and a half, is when we finally found, a really great caregiver, and who they're still friends with to this day. But she came like 3 times a week for me to just be able to get a little time in the studio. Because that was important too, and we wanted to figure out how to continue to be able to do that well. And I basically entered the studio and just started painting circle after circle. I was so tired that I just like, it was more of just this thing, but yet it became, it was a thing of joy to me, like these overlapping circles that were happening, and it was still light that I was thinking about and kind of reflecting in the work, but the work was changing. It looked totally different than the Mercyscapes. And, one day I was in the studio, I'm painting away, and I was talking to God, which happens a lot in my studio. I'm painting and talking and kind of just going, about my day. And the Lord was like, the same joy that you're experiencing in this very mundane, very repetitious, task is is something that you can tap into when you're experiencing the very mundane, very ordinary things in life, such as all the feedings and all the dirty dishes and all the dirty diapers. And that was like a whoa moment again for me, because I was like, right, like there is beauty in the mundane, and there is beauty in this, very repetitious, very mundane kind of task that can be applied to that. And I'm trying to remember where I was going with this, and I'm not remembering the full train of thought. But the idea being that, like, there is beauty in all of these mundane tasks, and I think that that's a super important thing for our kids to pick up too. Like, there's so many disciplines that they have in life that they do over and over again. But yet, if we choose it, there is joy in it.
Well, and as you're talking, I'm thinking about, well, I'm an athlete, and so I sometimes think about, some of the greatest athletes, and you look at them, and it's almost like they defy some of the just basics, right? Because they're so good. But what you miss is the countless hours that they've spent doing the basics, right? They
Right,
mastered all the basics, which then allowed them to depart from that, so to speak. They
right,
had to work really hard towards having the freedom to break the norm, so to
right.
speak. And so I'm
Yeah,
thinking about especially about creativity and similar to, I guess, critical thinking. With as a former English teacher, like how do you teach critical thinking, right? How do you teach creativity? I- How do you approach that topic? I mean, is it something that you just think creatively, or is it maybe through the mundane, and you go through the motions over and over again until how did that come about for you, and what would be your recommendation, maybe even for teachers that are trying to instill creativity in their students?
right. So back to my earlier point, I was remembering why I was talking about beauty in the mundane. What really changed in my work is that it became less about, and I will also get to your question too in
No,
the
you're
future.
good.
It became less about the end result for me, less about the final product, and way more about the process. And it became all about enjoying the process, which then got me curious about, well, how am I approaching this process? Like, what am I doing here to, make sure that my life is what I call refer to as like sustainably creative. What does that look
Mhm.
like? What do I need? What does my life need to look like in order to make sure that I don't, go through burnout or,
Right.
the artist block, as many people talk about. And I literally think that, when we're teaching art, some of the, like a lot of these things apply. It's about the process. It's about teaching the kids to enjoy the journey of it, and really not letting them think too hard about the end result. It took, you know, hundreds of paintings for me to get to the point before somebody actually bought one,
Yeah.
I think that like recognizing failure, embracing, you know, I don't know, like, I think it's just so, I think we're so focused on end results in so much of our artistic endeavors that we forget that the journey's really the thing. And I think that's very, it's a biblical principle and concept too that God talks about often. And we see that through, so many different characters in the Bible. It's about what happens to them in the process that they are changed and transformed. And it's less about the end result. It really, that's not the thing to be focusing on. And so, how do we teach that? I think it comes with having great, art teachers that are less focused on grades. And I know this will
Hmm.
sound like crazy talk,
All right.
but more that they are focused on how the kids are processing and going through the phases of creating something, and how they embrace their mistakes, how they're willing to let go of, end result stuff. And I think if we paid more attention to that and somehow were able to affirm that within a classroom setting, I think it would be profound, how much our
Hmm.
kids would learn and how quickly they would learn.
I love that, and I'm going to ask you here in a little bit of advice for maybe aspiring artists that want to pursue a career. But I think what we shouldn't forget, of course, is that art is enriching to our lives, whether or not we're pursuing a career in arts or not, right? And so I think sometimes in a school setting, like you said, we focus so much on where it's 45 minutes and then you get a grade and then we're doing this in order to
Mhm.
get it's almost like killing the
Mhm.
joy of the process,
Totally.
right? Of creating art or writing poetry. Or I really regret not having picked up writing poetry, but I always felt it like a chore, right? It's just something that every now and then gets assigned and I get a grade. And
Yeah.
so it kind of killed the joy of the process
Mhm.
of creating. And so I hope we don't do the same with our students in art. But there might be some listeners that have children, or maybe the children are listening themselves, that know I got a gift, and I would love to do something with art. What would be kind of your recommendation, for young aspiring artists?
Create the space and the time for them to do it, and affirm the process and the journey of it, and don't worry about the end results. I think, something that my son picked up in COVID lockdowns was origami. And
Yeah.
I'll never forget, like, there was so many times, like, and it was so beyond me because I was like, dude, I can't help you. Like, I have no idea what this is about. Like, there's so many other things I could help, but this is like, you got me. I have no clue. And it would be so frustrating to him to you learn these like major, and we're talking like massive sheets that he would then fold into these tiny crevices and creases, and it would take hours and hours, and it, tears for sure at certain points too, right? But all I could do was just affirm the journey. I just was like, this is amazing. Like, look at that, that pattern, that crease pattern that you've been able to create, even if you don't create anything from it. That's amazing. Being able to just affirm the journey, affirm his perseverance, affirm his creativity, affirm his determination, and a lot of his choices in that's what I focused on, because I really honestly had no clue about the end result and how he would get there. It was way beyond me, but it was so beautiful to watch him just like stick to it, and I thought that was incredible. So I think those kinds of things are what we can do with our kids, creating space and time for them to pursue whatever it is that they happen to be interested in. Like, I haven't forced my kids to paint. Like, that's not, they do, but I haven't forced it on them. And they each kind of have their own niches of art things that they want to do. And it's been so cool to see their own personalities come out in the expressions of how they choose to, pursue it. But yeah, I think creating space, creating time, affirming the process, and just, whenever they do express interest in something that is artistic, don't be afraid, because I
Mhm.
honestly believe like it'll be one more way that they will potentially get to know an aspect of God, of God's character.
Beautiful. Well, this was absolutely delightful. I have one more question for you that we asked every one of our guests here on Anchored. And I actually and I didn't even prep you for that. So we'll see how it goes. I'm gonna ask you, of course, the question we always ask: if there's one book or one text that
Hmm.
has been most impactful in your life, what would it be? And if it's the Bible, give me a
It's not.
specific book. Okay.
It's not to say that the Bible isn't,
Right,
funny
right,
to say
right.
that, but okay. So I feel like there's 3 or 4 different answers to this based on how I want to kind of segment it. But as a kid, for me, as a kid, I definitely would say that the book Charlie and the Chocolate Factory by Roald Dahl was the book that literally unlocked the power of the imagination for me, and just how from that point on, every book I read, I felt like my imagination just went wild. And so that was the book that unlocked that for me. But that was a kid. And then I would definitely say that in my 30 somethings, the book, The Hole in Our Gospel by Richard Stearns,
Hmm.
was a deeply influential book for me that helped me to understand how to use my influence for good. And then another one that is very recent, like was basically through the pandemic that really impacted me was John Mark Comer. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he used to be a pastor actually in Portland. He is no longer, but he wrote a book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, and it just really again emphasized the importance of like the art of slow living and intentional living, and that to me was a really great read. And then most recently, I would, as I've quoted him often in this podcast, but
Right.
Makoto Fujimura's book Art and Faith. To me, it's a very special gift to be not only an artist but also an author. Most of what I paint, it literally will like take me like dozens of paintings before I actually can start to like be like, Lord, what are you doing here? What's happening? I don't know what's going on, because often it's just so intuitive and I just have to get it out and paint it. I don't know, and it's so hard to put words to it. It's only because I've now been painting for over 20 years that I feel like I can somewhat talk to, what it is that goes on in my heart and mind. But Makoto Fujimura, I felt when I read that book, I was like, this is like the beat of my heart. Like this totally like represents how and why I do what I do. And I loved how he worded it. And so that it really resonated with me. So that's a great read for any, I think,
Amazing.
aspiring Christian artist.
Fantastic. And then just a quick follow up. I don't know if that's even a fair question. Do you have a favorite painting?
Ooh, yes, I do. It's Van Gogh's Irises.
Okay, Van
Yeah,
Gogh's Iris. And
which I actually get to see in person at some point.
we're all gonna look it up now after
Yeah.
after listening. Well, Rochelle, I have had the honor to look at some of your art already. Where can our listeners go to see your art to find out more?
So I have a website. It is literally just my name. So it's RachelleKairns.com. And so that is the best way to stay in touch with me. I do an email newsletter if you want to stay informed about what's going on in the arts. As well, I'm pretty present on Instagram. And so my hashtag there is Rachelle_Kearns. And you can DM me there and I will respond. Yeah, other than that, I think that's basically it.
Wonderful. Well, this was absolutely delightful. Again, we're here with Rachelle Kearns, who is an artist from Toronto, but now lives in Seattle. And this was a wonderful conversation, Rachelle. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Soren, it's been great to talk to you. Thank you.